bring on our next guest, Timothy Coe. There he is, the CEO of Entheon Biomedical. Timothy, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Let's get those likes up.
Let's get those likes up. Let's get those slides up, guys. Let's bring up Tim's slides. There they are. Tim, tell us all about Entheon and what you're working on.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me on here. I'm Tim. I'm the CEO of Entheon Biomedical. Entheon, we're trying to develop the new dimension in addiction treatment. Just before we start off, Entheon is powered by an unwavering commitment to significantly improve the odds of beating addiction and improving patient care. I lost a brother to addiction, and my story is representative of hundreds of thousands of stories of families that are struggling with finding their loved ones solutions at work. So Entheon is developing a personalized system of medicine within the psychedelic therapy space. We're seeking to increase precision and safety, utilizing DMT and a variety of diagnostic tools meant to aid the process of assessment and prescription. So the precision medicine platform that we have in development is comprised of two distinct parts. Obviously, we have a DMT-based drug delivery system that seeks to leverage the very unique pharmacokinetics of dimethyltryptamine to create flexible therapeutic programs. And the intention there is to optimize dosage and duration of treatments to suit individual patient needs, understanding that people that suffer from addiction issues have a wide spectrum of difficulties and personal health sort of nuances. Our companion precision medicine platform is intended to predict mental health risks as well as characterize different metabolic factors that may affect care. The intention is to aid in drug selection as well as the personalization of therapy. And we want this to be applicable not only to DMT, but also to other classes of drugs as the psychedelic medicine space evolves. We currently have ketamine available for administration, and we see over the next 5 years or so a multitude of new molecules coming online. So we're really trying to develop out the tool set that physicians can use to better make those medical decisions. So the situation that brings us here is quite dire. I talked about my personal scenario, but that's lived out hundreds, if not millions, of times over across the world. Within the U.S., approximately $740 billion a year is put towards is the estimated cost of treating drug addiction, and it's comprised of healthcare costs, policing, a variety of things, lost productivity. It's a massive burden in terms of societal load. Globally, approximately 2% of the world's population suffers from some form of addiction, and 11.4 million people approximately die prematurely as a result of drug addiction. Again, within America, approximately 21.2 million Americans have some form of substance use disorder, but sadly, only 1 in 10 of those people actually receives the type of treatment that they need. From a statistical perspective, it's pretty grim. We see that instance rates across these various addictions are in the millions. And of course, death is a terrible statistic to track, but sadly, that is one of the ultimate outcomes of untreated addiction. Part of the problem here may boil down to the fact that, in spite of these this huge public health crisis, the actual amount of people that receive treatment is really quite low, 4.4 and 17.5 respectively across alcohol and opioids. Smoking, of course, there are options available, but in spite of their plentitude, we still see these massive numbers of deaths. And again, the economic impact is in the hundreds of billions. So some of this may boil down to the fact that treatment options presently are not very promising. The reality is the frontline defense for a lot of these addiction issues is residential treatment. My brother was in 6 or 7 different treatment centers before ultimately we lost him. And the reality is that for residential treatment, the efficacy is low as 5 or 10%. And often families or individuals will go to multiple drug treatment centers with no real effect, and they may ultimately lose their lives to addiction. When that's compounded by the fact that the cost of these things can range anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 per stay. Families are still willing to pay that because, of course, you'd pay anything. But ultimately, it's sadly quite ineffective. 12-step recovery is an option that's free to society, and it's done some amazing things. But there are some excluding factors that make it alienating and sometimes ineffective. It is shame-based in many people's estimation. does engage this process of self-discovery that seeks to unpack some of the psychological and emotional causes, but there are certain treatment barriers such as trauma or cognitive reasons why an individual may not be able to engage in that type of work meaningfully. Then, of course, we have medication-assisted therapies that seek to remove the drug of abuse and replace it with something else, whether it's a synthetic nicotine or a synthetic opioid. Um, Not paired with other types of therapies, these things alone are not effective, and we see high rates of relapse when people stop using these things. And often, these things, replace one dependence for another. So yeah, substance use disorder is an inherently complex issue. Removal of the substance alone does not guarantee abstinence, and actually, addicts are prone to relapse if their core issues are not addressed, and which is the reason why we see such high rates of relapse. So the root of addiction is thought to be psychological and emotional in nature. A lot of these sort of therapy processes and self-discovery processes seek to get there, but though these therapies attempt to address these core issues, they often prove insufficient, as sort of denoted by the statistics. Serotonergic psychedelics actually possess a huge potential to directly drive at these core issues. There's a long history of evidence that points to the potential effect of psychedelics in the use of treating addictions. Um, LSD was the sort of psychedelic of the time, the 60s and 70s, and before it was banned, there was actually quite a bit of research happening, and a meta-analysis of studies that took place over the 60s and 70s finds that there was a 58% reduction in addiction or alcoholism-related outcomes following dosing with LSD. Ayahuasca similarly shows a reduction in severity of alcoholism related issues. And psilocybin, I think, very shockingly and positively, recently demonstrated a really high rate of abstinence following psychedelic treatment. That work was done by one of our scientific advisors, Matthew Johnson, and it's very promising. And we're seeking to do something similar with DMT. So, what is it about psychedelics that is so, hugely potential in terms of affecting these transformations? Well, we think it boils down primarily to the effects of entropy. So, to understand this, we sort of need to understand what the addicted brain functions like. The addicted brain functions in a way that's quite similar to someone that's suffering from something like major depressive disorder, in that that brain state is characterized by a state of high habituation, high pathology, and also from a state of subcriticality. This means that sort of the person operates in a form of autopilot, where their belief set is very firmly established and pretty impenetrable. Psychedelics are really promising in they introduce entropy or randomness. Entropy in the thermodynamic sense is sort of has negative connotations, but within the context of neuroscience is actually a very useful and powerful effect in that it creates a randomness that forces the brain into a state of heightened plasticity, increased neuroplasticity or neural connectivity, which moves the brain into this state of you know uh, criticality where they do have to engage with the stimulus that they're encountering. This results in something called a pivotal mental state, which is marked by a ton of novelty, sometimes even visual novelty, which results in, generally learning, reordering of beliefs, actions, and behaviors. And another way to look at this is through this often, too often pointed at brain homology scaffold. On the top right, we see the non-psychedelic brain, sort of characterized by a few dozen neural connections. You can think of these as our sort of like autopilot, sort of day to day thinking in the brain of someone suffering from addiction. That default thinking can actually be quite detrimental, as it is sometimes characterized by distress or negative worldview. When psychedelics are introduced, we see this massive explosion in terms of neural connectivity. And so it's in that state where a person can relive experiences, reconsider traumas or connections, and actually, due to the recruitment of different cortical regions or different neural regions, have entirely new experiences and really reconstitute their belief system. So the molecule that we've selected to take into clinical development is DMT. So DMT elicits the desirable entropic effects of classical psychedelics, but has the unique pharmacokinetic qualities that make it a very promising molecule for clinical use. So a little bit of background into DMT. I think by now a lot of people know what it is, but it's a classic serotonergic that works primarily on the 5-HT2A receptor, similar to LSD and psilocybin. It's been present in and used within South American indigenous medicine for hundreds, if not thousands of years, pretty extensively scientifically studied. It's present in hundreds of, or dozens, if not hundreds of plant species. And very importantly, it's endogenous to the human body, meaning that we produce it. Some people believe it has some feature related to sleep or even death and delivery of meaning in death. But this also means that we're experts in terms of metabolizing it through the process of monoamine oxidase. We are absolute pros at dispelling this from our body. So that makes it very safe. And the other thing is that it is very short acting. And that's a feature that we're seeking to leverage within our development. Some little science fact sheet here. DMT has some very interesting differentiating qualities. It is a very potent, has very potent activation of 5-HT2A receptors compared to other psychedelics, meaning it's very strong in terms of its effect. It has very rapid pharmacokinetics, reaching half-life at 5 minutes compared to, say, 50 minutes with psilocybin, meaning that it allows for near real-time clearance of the drug when intravenous infusion is stopped. And there are also neuroplasticity and neurogenesis qualities that make it very promising in terms of really cementing some of the acute plasticity effects that are achieved within that transformational experience. So really cementing those positions in a positive sense. And there are also anti-neurodegenerative and anti-ischemic qualities to DMT that are also quite interesting. From a phenomenological perspective, there are some neurophysiological phenomena that are quite interesting to observe as well. Um, the main takeaway here is that there's something called limpal Zeph intensity, which is a measure of entropy. And we see that with DMT, there's a massive explosion in entropy. And that's evidenced, the sort of effect of that is evidenced in something called reverse cortical traveling waves. That shows a change in predictive coding. And we can think of predictive coding as just being that default system. We actually see reversals in that that indicates that the individual is critically engaged and learning. So the DMT experience is many things, least of which is it's odd. So there are generally some very unusually vivid visual images, as well as some somatic or bodily effects. And there are also a wide and powerful range of emotions, far outside of the scope of what the individual is probably used to feeling. And this is indicative of that highly entropic effect, where there are neural connections made that are outside the scope of what's typical. And this often results in very much deep clarity and insight into one's life and relationships as one looks at their sort of internal composition through a new lens. And this really does often result in dismantling of deeply held beliefs, which is very important for substance disorder sufferers that maybe have erroneous or detrimental beliefs. So yeah, DMT possesses some very significant therapeutic advantages over classic psychedelics. In short, some of these classic psychedelics have a very long window of engagement, anywhere from 6 to 8 hours and even longer. This makes it quite difficult to scale, as psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is requiring, physician oversight for that whole process. There are also very limited means of ending a negative adverse event. We're going to be dealing with some pretty difficult subject matter in these experiences, and it can inherently be overwhelming. And should that person really reach a point of distress with some of these longer form psychedelics, there is no meaningful way of stopping that other than to use heavy sedatives or anxiolytics. There's also lack of precise dose control. Once the dose is taken, there's no way to modulate that. DMT, on the other hand, in the way that we're delivering it intravenously, we can create far shorter session lengths, allowing for higher throughput. And it also gives us the ability to end the session quickly if medically necessary. It also does give us the ability to titrate or modify the dose if we find that the individual is responding unexpectedly to the dose that they're receiving. This allows us to create flexible therapeutic designs, interspersing short psychedelic sessions with that very important integration of psychotherapy. We're able to move progressively and gradually towards therapeutic effect rather than throwing someone into the deep end and having them unpack 6 to 8 hours of very intense subject matter. So this may potentiate less time needed within the psychedelic state. So obviously, we're very committed to the development of DMT, but we're also very much committed to the development of a personalized psychedelic medicine system. Entheon RX is our focus. There is to commercialize DMT-based molecules. We have a clinical trial in late Q4 of this year at Center for Human Drug Research that's a safety trial focused on pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. We're also investigating DMT-based new molecular entities, as well as delivery systems to suit different patient populations. Entheon DNA, we have two subsidiaries within the genetic space. We have currently some direct consumer genetic tests available for purchase related to psychiatric risk factors as well as metabolic factors that may modify treatment in terms of how people respond to those drugs. And we're also working on a healthcare provider oriented panel. Entheon IQ, we have a observational study for which we just received IRB approval. That's to look at biomarkers associated with the ketamine experience. We're doing that with our partner in Austin, Heading Health. And we're also expanding our data analysis of DMT-based biomarkers to really understand the true biomarkers associated with these states, to give physicians greater insight as to what their patients are going through in this highly subjective, often difficult to describe experience. And we're also looking to characterize mental health phenotypes, understanding that different people with different brain physiologies will respond differently to different types of treatment. So for the Entheon RX programs, we believe DMT can help with regard to a variety of addiction disorders, as well as to some behavioral addictions, whether it be food, gambling, or sex. And we see the potential to expand this to different mental health indications. Our Entheon DNA and IQ platforms, we believe, are relevant not only to DMT, but to a variety of other drug classes within the psychedelic space. Looking at genetic risk and metabolic factors, we think that we have sort of product relevance within not only serotonergic psychedelic therapies, but also ketamine therapy, which is where we're putting some of our effort. And within EEG, again, we're looking to monitor various psychedelic drug states, as well as characterize different phenotypes to help precision guide some of those therapies. So yeah, the Entheon precision medicine platform is premised on some very important operating assumptions. Mental illness, I think we all know, can and does prove fatal if untreated. Efficient diagnosis and prescription are therefore crucial in light of that. And traditional prescription models are reliant on heavily subjective measures, sometimes verbal tellings of symptomology. And we believe that genetics and neurophysiology may determine individual responses to treatment, but also that many psychedelic therapies will be available in the future. So our intent is to predict how likely someone is to have or develop psychiatric disorders, to mitigate the probability of negative adverse events, and to match patients to personalized treatments that are more likely to work while causing fewer side effects. And we also intend to track and metricize positive effects so that we can actually get some empirical data around what works and what doesn't, and start to build an understanding of what treatments are appropriate for which patient populations. So the intent is to provide healthcare providers objective tools to aid in assessment, monitoring, and follow-up. So yeah, we believe that the psychedelic treatment paradigm exists within three distinct buckets: assessment and preparation, for which we're developing genetic tools and EEG tools to help personalize therapies; drug administration, where we're developing DMT-based drug solutions, as well as EEG monitoring tools to increase precision and safety; as well as within integration, we're developing EEG collection tools to support the very necessary ongoing psychotherapy that is used to unpack the sessions. We want to create things that are empirical, that the tools that give empiricism to the longitudinal tracking of treatment efficacy, and as well as to guide ongoing therapy to see if there's any degradation of therapy quality, from which therapists can suggest changes. Very briefly, our R&D timelines, just a snapshot. We have a clinical trial planned for Q4 of this year. That's nearing, that's very imminent. We're doing some in vivo work with regard to DMT for subsequent clinical trials, getting ahead of that for potential FDA engagement. We're also doing some observational work within the ketamine space and looking to expand our EEG biomarker projects into different drug classes. And in Q3, we're targeting to do a multitude of phase 2 studies, efficacy studies specific to different drugs. The Entheon umbrella is comprised of a wonderful array of partners and subsidiaries. And yes, the team, in my estimation, is some pretty handsome fellas, as well as some very accomplished people representing cannabis, traditional biotech, wearables, cancer research, and some of the biggest pharmas that you can think of. And our scientific advisory board is obviously among the most accomplished and pioneering within the psychedelic research space, and they represent specialization in psilocybin, DMT, patient care, neuroimaging. All of these people combine to keep the Entheon story, very scientifically robust and scientifically exacting. So yeah, Entheon's integrative approach to precision medicine is paving the way for psychedelic psychiatry. We're leveraging the unique pharmacokinetics of DMT to create safe and adaptive drug experiences. We're pairing that with genetic biomarkers to predict drug selection and response, and adding to the mix EEG biomarkers to guide therapeutic programs, inform physician and patient state during experience, and to track efficacy over time. All told, that combines to create a personalized psychedelic-based psychiatric care system. And just, I think, given the context of the conference, the psychedelic drug market is projected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 12.36% over the next 8 years to reach 10.75 billion by 2027. So there's very much room to grow. So we are trading on the CSC under the ticker ENBI on the Frankfurt Exchange, as well as the OTCQB. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about Entheon.
Thank you, Tim. Wow, is very interesting. Just one quick question from our chat from my man Mitch. He's wondering how you derive your DMT.
Our DMT is synthetically derived.
Okay.
It is very important for us to make sure it's to a purity level that is sufficient for human use.
Man, applaud all the work you're doing. Addiction, obviously serious thing. So Timko, CEO Entheon Medical. Thank you so much, Tim. That was very enlightening. Thank you.
Absolutely appreciate it.
All right.